Today we will be solving equations, except these equations look a little bit different. Instead of numbers and variables, all we will be working with today is variables. But these variables work just the same way that numbers do. For instance, in this case, it tells us to solve for x. Well, that means we want to find out what 1x is equal to. And like we've been doing with the other equations, we need to undo the things that are being done to x to get back to just 1x. In this example, we have a times x equals b. When we have two variables, or a variable and a number next to each other, we have to remember there's an invisible multiplication symbol right in between them. So we're going to do like we did with numbers. We're going to undo the equation. In this case, we have a times x equals b. Well, we want to undo the multiplication of a times x to get x alone, so we divide both sides by a. And you'll find out that, well, a times x divided by a, they'll cancel each other out. And what we're left with is x is equal to b divided by a, and we just leave it like that because these aren't like terms, they're two different variables. We just leave it like that. In this case, we have an addition or subtraction problem. We're saying x minus n is equal to m. Well, to find out what x is alone, we need to do the opposite. We say to ourselves, well, what is being done to x? We're subtracting n from x, so we want to undo that. The way we undo that was we add n to both sides, and we write it underneath because that's where we have room. Well, if we have x minus n plus n, they will cancel each other out, and what we are left with is x is equal to, and this time we can write it next to each other. I know in division we wrote one over the other and we left one over the other, but that's because that's how we write division. One number, a line, and the other number you're dividing by on the bottom. In this case, we would do m plus n is equal to x, and we can write them next to each other. And now here's another example of an equation with only variables. Usually we would have x and then there would be numbers here that we would undo. Well, we're going to treat these just like those numbers. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at our x and say, well, what's being done to our x? If we look right here, we're adding it. That's one thing that's being done to it. If you look right here, we're multiplying, and that's the other thing that's being done to it. When you solve an equation, you say, what is being done to x, and how do I undo that? Well, the first thing we're going to undo is our adding. So what we'll say is, well, I want to undo this plus a, so I subtract a from both sides. I subtract a from both sides. And after we do that, plus a minus a cancels each other out, and you write what you're left with. We're left on this side with b times x and its multiplication, but we're just writing them next to each other because we have that hidden multiplication symbol, is equal to c minus a. Well, we have one step left. We say we still have something being done to x. We usually, almost always, undo the addition and subtraction first. In this case, we say b times x is equal to c minus a. Well, how do I get x all alone? I undo it. What's being done to x? It's being multiplied by b. So I take both sides and I divide it by b. We take everything on this side and we divide it by b. You can think of it as there's parentheses here. We have to divide everything here by b. After we cancel out b times x divided by x, we're going to be left with just x. So we're left with just x. And on this side, this is what we are left with. This is what x is equal to. It is c minus a divided by b, and our answer would be x equals c minus a divided by b, and leave it like that. You can't simplify anything. You just leave these like this. You can't combine c, a, or b because they're not like terms. Here's our last example equation. We're solving for x. So we need to yet again look and say, well, let's look at our x, what we're solving for, what is being done to it. One of the things that's being done to it is it's being added. B is being added to x, right? And the other thing is this whole thing on top, we can think of it like there's parentheses around there. B plus x is being divided by c. So the first thing we're going to need to do to both sides is undo this because both of these things are being divided by c. You only do multiplication and division first if everything else is being multiplied by them. So our first step would say, well, this whole thing's being multiplied or divided by c, so I need to multiply by c. So I multiply by c on both sides. And then I write what I get. Well, c divided by c times c cancel out. And what I'm left with is just what was on top. b plus x equals, well, we have c times d. In algebra, we like to hide our multiplication symbols. So I'm just going to write d and c next to each other. All right, the other thing is we have b being added to x. Well, how do we get rid of that? Subtract b on both sides. We have a positive b being added to x. We put a negative b there. We're going to do a negative b there. And when we're done, these two cancel out, cross them out. You're all gone. And what we're left with is, we'll do it in blue, x is equal to dc minus b, which is what we had on this side. So x is equal to dc minus b. And so there's another example problem you might run into.